So the inventor has created this amazing tool. A human can give it stimuli, it can give it a move, an action, and the machine will make a corresponding move based on the human's action. What an incredible marvel and a masterpiece of engineering. People are just overwhelmed by this amazing creation and what it can do. They've never seen anything quite like it. I'm not talking about ChatGPT though, and I'm not talking about any AI tool. I'm talking about Hungarian Wolfgang von Kempler's invention from the 18th century and into the 19th century, his Mechanical Turk, a chess-playing machine that defeated Napoleon Bonaparte and Benjamin Franklin and was shown throughout the courts as a wonder of work, of invention. Only the machine was a complete fraud. The whole idea that it was engaging with humans and responding appropriately to the moves that they made on the chessboard was a lie. Von Kempelen had not created a chess-playing machine. He had created an amazingly believable hoax. Hidden in the depths of his machine was a person who was surreptitiously looking at the moves the humans made and responding with the corresponding moves on a chessboard. Even though it was a total hoax that fooled so many very smart people, we can still learn a lot from the man that was hidden in the box. For instance, have we ever removed the man from the box when it comes to artificial intelligence? This is the Man in the Box episode. If you're looking for an Alice in Chains episode from the 90s about their hit song Man in the Box, this isn't the right one for you. If you want to talk on the side, drop me an email. I'd love to talk to you about Alice in Chains. I'd loved Alice in Chains. But this is a Man in the Box about AI and critical literacy episode today. This is episode 2 of the Teaching for Learning Center's podcast. My name is Jared Schroeder. I'm an associate professor of journalism at the Missouri School of Journalism and also an AI teaching fellow at the Teaching for Learning Center. And this is part of the series. This is a part of a series that engages with the Co-Intelligence book written by Ethan Mollick and engages with faculty and instructors and thinkers around campus about AI critical literacy and how we can better understand these tools and teach our students to better understand and use these tools. My guest today is Kevin Brown. He is also an AI teaching fellow at the Teaching for Learning Center, and he was also a member of the AI task force with me last year. And I'm going to let Kevin introduce himself the rest of the way. But what follows is just an incredibly thought-provoking and engaging discussion with Kevin. I'm so thankful that he found the time to speak with us. So I hope you enjoy his discussion as much as I did.
My name is Dr. Kevin Brown. I'm an associate professor of digital media and performance in the Department of Theater and Performance Studies here at the University of Missouri at Columbia. My research interests are the intersection of the digital and performance. I've studied everything from robots to karaoke to virtual reality, and I'm very interested in the theoretical aspects of these topics, as well as implementing them in some of my creative work, which is an interesting take, given that a lot of the takes on AI these days come from engineering and science and all the great ways it's being used in those fields as well.
It sounds like you're the perfect person to have on our AI Critical Literacy podcast then. I had Tori Mondelli, the director of the Teaching for Learning Center at the University of Missouri, on the first episode, and I asked her this question. I want to ask you this too, because it's interesting to see how people answer it. What was your first experience with AI?
Yeah, so this goes way back to my grandfather who had a VIC-20. So this was like back in the 80s, and he showed me this program called Eliza, which was the first chatbot. So that was, I think I was about like 13 or 14. And at the same time, I had started learning how to code in BASIC on my Apple II Plus computer. I also talked my parents into getting me an Apple II Plus computer. And I read a book about the brain that my grandfather recommended as well, and got really interested in, the idea of what is intelligence. Even at that time, artificial intelligence was a buzzword and was coming into kind of public knowledge. And so where I decided to go to undergraduate was the University of California at San Diego, because they had a cognitive science program. I studied in that program. I started out in that program. I ended up changing to anthropology and psychology, which were two essential elements of that studies. I was really interested in intelligence, the question of human evolution and the brain. So I've, been interested in intelligence for a really long time. I think the other part of that question is, what was your first experience with generative AI, right? Like with generative artificial intelligence. And that came for me in 2021. I was studying, interesting trends and performers and artists that are coming up. And one artist that was using AI caught my attention named Alexander Reben. And so I started studying about his work and did an interview with him and found out about some of the technologies he was using and started trying out GPT-3, and you had to apply and pay money. And so I found an open source and free GPT J6B that was free for anyone to use, and I started interacting with it. One of the first things that I did with it is I fed it the line Hamlet, all in capitals, colon, the king is dead. And it immediately started writing in Shakespearean prose. And I was blown away and ended up using that in my creative work. And, it helped me. I actually really collaborated with it to write a play in the style of Shakespeare that we ended up doing a public reading of in early 2022. So I was really getting into the Gen AI at that point. And then later in 2022 was when, of course, ChatGPT in November came into the public consciousness and just really caused a stir. So I was just there a little bit ahead of time.
So it's interesting because I think I did the same thing when I was thinking about when I purposely left it just your first experience with AI to see where people go with it. I wanted to leave it open, which is good because that led you to Eliza instead of going straight to ChatGPT. Yeah. I did Eliza too, and when I answered it for the first time, not because I did it in the 80s, I wasn't that cool. I was busy playing on my Commodore 64. But I did it because I ran into it, years later. It's from the 60s. But Eliza really was first AI tool. I mean, it's a chat bot, right? And so, but the interesting thing about Eliza is Eliza's limited in the spectrum of answers that she can give you, or it can give you. Whereas when we make the leap to the turning point with ChatGPT, and I think that's one of the things we're going to get to here in a minute today, is this idea that there's almost an endless number of possible responses. That one of the big leaps forward when we think about AI and how it works for the purposes of this podcast, one of the big jumps forward was the idea that it was no longer limited in the spectrum of answers it could give or engage with, which makes me think also of the book we're looking at, the Co-Intelligence book, and we're looking at introduction in chapter 1 today. That he includes the story about the Mechanical Turk. And had you ever heard this story before reading it in Co-Intelligence?
Yeah, I have, because I have been studying automatons sort of in my studies of robots and, kind of in a lot of the work that I do, which is based in media archaeology, which is kind of going back in time and seeing what were the precursors for the kind of technology that we have today. Mechanical Turk story is really funny and I think very applicable to kind of what's happening now. Part that really interests me about the Mechanical Turk stories, it's this automaton that was created in the 18th century in Hungary, and it was supposedly it could play chess, and it toured all around Europe and had, I think, even played Napoleon Bonaparte. And
it's famously called the Napoleon torn apart match because it destroyed Napoleon and it destroyed Benjamin Franklin. And you can just you can imagine the magic, the fear that this would cause, that this tool, without any human touching it, would move pieces. Like the idea that a human would move a chess piece and then a tool would respond. This is, hundreds of years before we could even consider a computer, really. And it would automatically move a piece. I can imagine why people were just riveted by this. And actually is a really good chess player too. But then go ahead and ruin the story for everybody.
Yeah,
what
the
happened next?
Punchline is that, and I don't think it was until later in the 1800s, by I think a son or some family member of the guy who was the guy hiding under the table making the chess moves. And so it just ended up being a human disguised as a machine. Yeah, so what fascinates me about this story and its relation to AI is, again, kind of the performative aspect of it, right? Is that there was no mechanical chess player. There was a guy performing a mechanical chess player. And in that way, that would be an example of a kind of performative media. In a way, GPT is a kind of performative media as well, because I don't believe that it's actually intelligent. I believe that it's performing intelligence.
Is there still a man in the box?
There is, it
Yeah.
absolutely is. That it's human data. And that's the thing, kind of philosophical question is what does it mean to be artificial? And then what does it mean when we start treating these systems that are essentially human data and based on human behavior and, millennia of human knowledge to work, and we suddenly other it from ourselves and look at it as something different than ourselves, but it's really a human. So, it's human data in disguise. So when you ask it things like, will an AI destroy all humans? And it comes back and says, yes, AI will destroy all humans. It's not the AI thinking that, it's all of the other people and science fiction writers throughout time who have written about machines and the human fear that they will one day replace us. And so it's just kind of regurgitating those fears back to us, and we take them at face value. And so there's still a human in there under the covers.
The MTurk tool was a really intricate tool.
Yeah.
Like the little guy inside the box, because it had to be a very small human to fit inside the box, had to have a chessboard that mirrored the above board chessboard that everybody could see, so he could see what move to make. And the idea that he could make the move on the chessboard in front of him, and it would make the corresponding move up on the actual visible chessboard. That's really interesting to think of it that way, that we still are dealing with the man in the box. It's just a much more complicated man in the box. In my communication law class, I have been asking it, and I asked it again this semester. I think I started in spring 2023 maybe. I asked it if AI should have First Amendment rights, and it said no. Very distinctly, very deliberately no, because it's not human. And I actually had it put to a Taylor Swift song, and it did. It wrote a Taylor Swift song about not having First Amendment rights. This semester, I asked it the same question while I was class prepping for the same class period, and it didn't say it doesn't have First Amendment rights. Like it sort of hinted that it does, and I put it to a Beyonce song because it needed a new artist. But the fun thing is, like, I'm trying to figure out, is that just the luck of the draw, or has the AI evolved in what it's trained on to the extent that it now believes it has First Amendment rights where it didn't before?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know because it's hard to know exactly what data it's trained on. That depends on what model you're using. There's also human intervention. And so the model that you were using that said no, it may be that the new trainers think it's funny. I don't know, think it's intriguing to ask those questions. And also, there's probably more data in the world. As they train these new models, they're constantly training the next model on the current data. And so it could just be that in the last few years, more people started writing about the question of, should AI have First Amendment rights? And so maybe the data is picking up on some of those conversations. It's hard to know because it's a human in the box, but it's also a black box that we don't always know how it's working.
But these are really healthy literacy questions, I hope. I hope for the podcast, because we're analyzing the nature of the tool and how it's trained and what it does. There's a reason why Moloch brings up the Mechanical Turk story, and that's because he's really focusing on, in this part that we're talking about today, kind of the terms, the roles, and kind of the functionality of the generative AI. And he starts it like the very first beginning, like the very first introduction of the book. He says, I believe the cost of getting to know AI, really getting to know AI, is at least 3 sleepless nights. How many sleepless nights did you have, Kevin, when you encountered generative AI?
Oh, wow. A lot.
Really?
One of the first real sleepless night moments, I had, I was getting it to generate all these plays. And so I was trying things like, can it write, as Shakespeare? It's very good at writing like Samuel Beckett, interestingly enough. And so then one of the things I tried, just because I thought it would, started thinking about okay, what sort of things, if I ask it about, will it know about? And so I started thinking in terms of the mythic and, like Hamlet. So for example, I asked about Hamlet because that's one of the most well-known plays, and there's so much been written about it. I figured that it would probably know about Hamlet. Asking it about different kinds of mythology and asked it to write its own modern myth about AI. That was pretty interesting. And then one day I just decided to write Genesis 1:1, enter, and it started writing the Bible.
Okay. That makes sense.
It was a slightly different version of the Bible. And so, when it gets to the, the tribes of Israel and the names, and suddenly it's hallucinating and creating new names. And that was like, oh, wow, this technology is different and could be misused in a lot of ways, right? Like thinking about if I can create a forgery of the Bible, that's a problem. Like that's a problem for future generations and information and knowledge. And so, yeah, that was one of the big sleepless nights, I suppose. And then the other sleepless nights are thinking about how is this going to change education, and and starting to have conversations even in 21 and 22 with some of our campus leaders, and thinking about just how this was going to change a lot of things. So yeah, that's it as well. I think with Moloch, I think it's a similar thing, that he's like, wow, this is going to transform a lot of things. It's like people have compared it to the invention of the steam engine, or the invention of the light bulb, or the invention of electricity. And it is, yeah, just one of those transformational kinds of technology. And it seems like this is going to be a big thing and comes true, and you just sort of watch it unfold and try to get sleep at night.
It's really healthy to be concerned. If you don't have any sleepless nights about generative AI when you encounter it, then that's unhealthy. Like, it seems healthy to be concerned that this is going to do something for our teaching, like we care about and like the podcast cares about, but also just our society, and for my research, democracy, and what it's going to do, or what it's already doing to what we know and what we think we know. Which transitions really well to the next thing I want to ask you about, and that is, we were on the AI task force together last spring, and we worked together. We were in the same group. And you have been one of the most pro AI, most started it early adopter, enthusiastic supporters of AI. And so I'm really glad, like, that's one of the reasons I'm glad that you could be a guest here is, I'm so much more skeptical, and I feel like others have been as well. While we were on the task force and people were like, well, what about the students cheating to use this, and all the people who wanted to get the students and stuff, you were often saying, well, wait, let's talk about this. What is your pitch? If you know that someone is listening to this who's absolutely never will I ever use AI in my classroom, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, part of, I think, why I have become so enthusiastic was, first of all, the realization that there's no point fighting it. Like, that this is here, it's ubiquitous already. It's popping up in so many places that it's not healthy, to close our eyes and put our head in the sand and, cover our ears and saying, la, la, la. That's not going to make it go away. And so the realization that this is changing education, whether we like it or not, let's maybe not wholly embrace it, but try to deflect it and make it something that it's an opportunity, right? And so some of the people that I started having conversations with, especially people like Tori and other people that run the writing program, and kind of thinking about this in terms of an opportunity and a way to transform education. And so I really have bought into this idea. So the pitch to the person who's very reluctant is, first of all, don't make it the forbidden fruit, right? Because as soon as you tell the students they can't use it, then what's the next thing they're going to do is they're going to go try it out, right? And so that's kind of a losing battle. There's so much opportunity to transform, I think, education, to transform, knowledge production. I recently, it was funny because I was reading Moloch's book, and he was talking about coding in Python and how, he could not do that before generative AI. And I've started to do that recently as well. And I have learned Python, and much of the help with Python comes from generative AI. Some of the tools that they have, like AI checkers built into them, so that when you hit an error, you say, explain the error, and the AI explains the error and suggests code to debug it. Yeah, from the perspective of lifting up a student to a place where they can gain knowledge that they wouldn't have had otherwise, and can gain that knowledge in a very quick and efficient way, I think is a hugely profound sort of opportunity. And so ultimately we owe it to our students. Our students are going to be working in a world where AI is ubiquitous, that knowing about AI, both, from a AI literacy, but also critical literacy point of view, that's going to be essential to the type of jobs that are being created in the future. AI might, be threatening certain jobs, but there are people that believe for every job that's threatened, there's more jobs that are being created but our students aren't going to be able to work in those jobs unless they at least navigate and understand what generative AI is and what it's useful for, what it's not useful for, how to use it ethically. A lot is the idea of moving from a transactional model of teaching to more of a process-based model of teaching, especially with writing. Writing pedagogy in the past has often focused on, okay, I gave you an assignment, you give me a paper, and I give you a grade. And that's sort of the extent of the exchange. When I teach writing, I emphasize that writing is a process, right? Writing is something that's never done. If you moved from that kind of transaction-based model to more of a process-based model, some of the things that I do with my students when I'm working with them and giving them assignments sometimes to work with ChatGPT, if they're doing that kind of assignment, it has to be transparent, like they're turning in their entire conversation.
With that in mind, what do you think about Malik's idea of co-intelligence? He discusses this, actually the whole book's called Co-Intelligence. He's helping us kind of figure out how we should think about AI. And he's saying, look, think of it as a co-intelligence. We're working with this intelligence. So as far as teaching and how we approach teaching and how we think about AI critical literacy, what do you think about his co-intelligence idea? Does it make sense to you?
It absolutely does. And I've been thinking about that kind of, I've thought about this relationship as a collaboration. If you are just having the generative AI sort of just generate, you're not really collaborating with it, right? And so the most interesting kind of conversations and most generative sort of chats that I've had are those sort of chats where there's a lot of interchange between me and the computer. And so, I totally buy into that it's a kind of co-intelligence, not only because this collaboration, it's kind of a collaboration and Gestalt theory, right? Like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. A human could create something on its own, an AI could create something on its own, but neither of those is going to be as good as something that a human and an AI collaborate on. And so that's really where, to me, that idea of co-intelligence comes in. There's really a kind of symbiosis, if you will, between the computer and the human. They're kind of like creating this new system that creates a new kind of intelligence, a co-intelligence. Part of what makes human beings so unique is that we have these multiple intelligence that work in consort, right? That the auditory channel works in concert with the visual channel, which works with the kinetic channel, and all of those together kind of create a kind of co-intelligence even within the human. And the other part of that is that technology has also always been part of that loop as well, right? That when you look at human evolution, one of the real marking points of when we start to diverge from animals is when kind of the proto-humans create tools, right? And start creating objects that can transform their environment. And so humans have always been making tools, and in a way, tool making might be like the definitive aspect of what it means to be human and what's helped us develop in different kinds of intelligences.
I mean, when I first read the co-intelligence, even the book title, I was like, are we saying we're equal? Are we saying that the human and the tool are equal creators, like business co-owners, or if you're co-teaching a class? I think it's assumed that there's an equality there, but at the same time, you're also listing a variety of ways that these tools can help enhance learning. Like students can learn more or differently or have more access to knowledge because of the AI tools.
Well, I mean, I think it goes back to maybe that idea of kind of the transactional model compared to the processual model, right? That if we're doing a process, then the students are learning from the process itself. If they're asking it the right questions, right? So if you ask it an inane question, it'll probably give you some inane answer. But if you ask it the right questions and continue to be curious and ask it more questions, then you can lead it to some really interesting conversations where, that student now has knowledge through that experience that otherwise they wouldn't have had. And so, to me, that's one of the most interesting uses of generative AI, especially now that generative AI is becoming more accurate. They're starting to create models that have different kinds of checking models where they're having other models check this model. Right. Sometimes it says some things that are incorrect, and you still have to have that critical thinking process there. But in terms of knowledge production, instruction and teaching students information, I think, is ultimately what we're here for, right? We're not here to grade a paper. Thinking back of how education was when I grew up, we used to diagram sentences to try to learn grammar, and eventually, educational scientists came along and showed that that's not how people learn grammar. And so now we rarely diagram sentences. Yeah, there's going to be continuing transformation of education where we have to ask the question of, is writing, what is the purpose of the writing? Is it to communicate? Because if it helps us communicate better, then I don't see a problem with that, depending on the context, right? Like if it's a email in business and you just need to get an answer, that's one thing. If you're writing, a thank you note to your friend for the Christmas gift, then I would personally still write with my own voice, right? So yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how this unfolds and how the different uses of AI either hinder or help our students in different ways in different levels. I think we as teachers are going to need to help lift them up.
Can you give an example of an assignment or an activity that you've used in class? Because I think I've heard you talk about them in other meetings, where this exactly what you're talking about, how the process of learning was enhanced by the AI. Can you provide an example of that?
Yeah, so I'm teaching this semester a new class called Writing with Generative AI. And it's a writing intensive class. So it's one of the classes that students take to learn how to write. And so we're doing throughout the semester, this was developed through the High Impact Practices program. And so they're doing a high impact assignment throughout the semester where they're essentially writing the equivalent of a master's thesis paper with the help of generative AI. Last week, we had one of the first steps, it's scaffolded and it's also all transparent because they have to turn in everything that they do. In fact, are required to turn in what they've done with the GPT. And so last week, we were working on research questions. I think this is a real great example, right? Because it begins with the question. It begins with this idea that, what do you want to research and what question do you need to ask in order to get the answer to that question?
That's one of the hardest things to learn, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely. And yet it's like one of the first things that both as scientists and as artists that we need to know how to do, right? Like what questions are you at, both artistically, like what are you trying to do? What questions about society or art are you asking? And so we did an in-class assignment, and they have actually 6 in-class ChatGPT exercises that we do in class and we do together where we lead them through a series of questions to ask the GPT, what is a research question? How do I go about creating a research question? In this class, the assignment is that they need to write their paper in some topic about the arts and humanities. And so let's start with a conversation of what are the arts and humanities, right? Like what counts as the arts and what counts as humanities? And then start to ask it questions about what you're interested in, like what the student is interested in. We ask a question about how do you narrow down that topic? How do you pick a methodology that helps you answer that question? And so
that's very much a co-intelligence exercise then.
Absolutely, yeah. The GPT, they're collaborating with it, they're asking questions, and they're getting support to help them do something that they wouldn't have been able to do alone. And just think about all the things they've now learned, right? What the arts are, what the humanities are, what a research question is, what a methodology is. Yeah, so that's an example.
I'm thinking about the literacy part of it. How much do you guys talk about the limitations of the tool, how the tools come to, like their prediction models? Like how much do you talk to students before the assignment starts about being literate of what the tool can and cannot do and what it knows, that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's one of the first things I start with is, this is what it's good for, this is what it's not good for. And then as I start to do demonstrations of, what kind of questions you can ask it, I point out things like, okay, it's given us a quotation and a source. Let's go check that source on the internet, make sure it's an actual source. Let's try to get that source. Let's make sure the quote is real. And, one of the first things off the bat you're talking about is hallucinations, right? Which is both, one of the pitfalls of this technology, but also sort of a result of the technology that allows the technology to be useful at all. Right. And so just talking through examples of hallucination and, the famous example of someone that asked Gemini, how many rocks should I eat every day? And then it answers like, you should eat 3 to 5 rocks every day. And so, yeah, so just like getting them aware, it doesn't do math very well, for example. It's not designed to do math. So when you ask it to count the number of R's in strawberry, it has a really hard time doing it, even though that should be something simple. Also, having discussions about the anthropomorphization problem where people assume that, oh, well, this is intelligent, and so there must be some sort of consciousness there, right? Or there's something thinking in there. And I think that that's not the best way to think. I mean, first of all, it's not true. Having an understanding that, no, this is not alive, there's no consciousness there, I think takes a little bit of the anxiety away, because there's a lot of anxiety around the use of AI. And also, when I do have the GPT start to write, one of the first things that we start to do is to critique it, right? To have the students go through and say, okay, what's good about this writing? And what could be improved about the writing, and then how do we start to interact with it to improve it, right? And so in that way, you're showing them, okay, like this part right here, it might be hallucinating a little bit. That's not quite right. I think that that's one of the first things of why I wanted to teach this technology, is to really make people aware that, hey, if you do decide to cheat and use it for a paper and turn it in for a class, you better know that topic better than your teacher knows it. If you don't, you're very likely to say something totally incorrect, or, betray you're cheating because you didn't follow the assignment at all. So yeah, there's a lot of ways in the educational world that means, academic dishonesty. In the business world, that could mean ruining a brand, right? Like those are the kinds of things that our students are going to need to know and how to navigate and to be aware of.
One of the really interesting things about what you're talking about, which I hope this is really helpful to people to think this through. I hope anybody listening is thinking this through for whatever they teach. How can I use these tools like on brand? It's the Missouri method if you're hands-on, right? So if you're engaging with the AI and saying, I'm using this tool that I'm probably going to use when I graduate, and I'm engaging with it, I'm thinking about what it says, hopefully you're gaining competencies for your future. You're also hopefully thinking about your critical thinking skills, because instead of thinking, how do I write this, you're critically analyzing what the tool has done and what could be better and what it has not done right. But you're also hinting at the predictive model, in which one of the things that Malik talked about in the reading that I wanted to touch on before we finished up is, Malik kind of tries to explain to the audience, and I thought for AI critical literacy, it'd be helpful for us to talk about it here. He tries to explain kind of how the AI come to do what they do. The magic of, you ask it a question and it answers in actually a language model way, like something we would understand to be like a relevant and logical response, almost like a human response. What would you highlight from what he wrote about that process that would be helpful to the audience?
Yeah, I mean, things move so quickly that some of the things he writes about, I think, have even evolved in the last couple of years. So one of the things that Malik talks about is the move from sort of general machine learning to supervised learning techniques. One of the things that's happened even more recently is the rise of unsupervised learning techniques that Malik doesn't talk a lot about. So what that means is, like, a task like image recognition, before in order to train our models, we would have to give it like a data set of images and tell it which one was a cat and which one was a dog, and give it a bunch of data. And then eventually, because it knew that these are all cats and these are all dogs, then it could tell the difference. Now we can just give it a bunch of images and it can classify the dogs and cats on its own. In terms of how it works, that's a big advancement. The other advancement, talking about the Markov models, which are statistical models that predict like what word will come next in a sentence. Right. And a lot of the ways that people talk about this is, okay, it's like an autocomplete on steroids. It's just adding one word at a time. But some of the ways that they're creating these models now actually create a larger contextual kind of statistical model. One of the things about these computers and the way that computers work is that computers used to work in a linear fashion. Now these technologies work in parallel. And so there's ways that these models can analyze not only the next word that's coming in a sentence, but create like an entire paragraph or an entire work, and then analyze how all of those, like simultaneously analyze how all of those different words fit together with all of the other words in the document, like fix it if it doesn't conform to the model. The other thing that's fascinating just in terms of how these models work, and I think that Moloch going through the inner workings, I think is so helpful to understand what kinds of things you can ask it and what kind of output it'll give you. Some of the kind of mind-bending things that I've been learning about AI and just my own curiosity about how it works are, first of all, yeah, it is a probability model, right? So it works on probability, it works on statistics, and essentially, like the way I understand it and can kind of visualize it, it's like a giant Excel spreadsheet, and in every cell of the spreadsheet is a token, or so a token can be like a word, part of a word, a couple of words. So each of those words then has basically an algorithm in that cell, and the algorithm actually represents a function drawn in three-dimensional space. And so like it's using the same math that you learned in your geometry class, and literally plotting a word on a XYZ axis, and then plotting other words that are either near that word or that can mathematically determine what word relationships are in parallel with other word relationships. That's why it also sometimes introduces biases, right? Because in the data, it can see that male and female corresponds most often to doctor and nurse. In the data, it's that I was actually asking ChatGPT today about how many dimensions it calculates into, and it says sometimes 256 to 1024 dimensions. I can't comprehend what that means, right? But the computer works on that level. Knowing those things about how it works are both like mind-blowing, but also can help you understand how it's processing these things in parallel. And also that, the idea that it's kind of the math that it's based on is geometric makes a lot of sense in terms of its ability to find patterns and also to kind of draw lines, if you will, through different topics. Like I was using it, we had assessment tasks where we are drawing curriculum maps and trying to show through these curriculum maps and through the assessment of how our learning objectives connect to the assignments, and how that also connect to the assessments of those assignments. And they all should run in a straight line, right? And so I had the GPT create one of these maps out of my syllabus, specifically like telling it, like, here's the learning objectives, here's the assignments, here's the assessments. Now, please create a matrix. Please also make it in a way that you can download it as an Excel spreadsheet. And it did it. And it blew me away, because all of the hours that we spent at our department retreat and people trying to figure out what's a curriculum map and figure out how these things connect, like it did almost instantly. And so, that's a really good example of knowing the internal workings, and then especially for teaching and education, kind of thinking about how we can implement it and what kind of questions we can ask it and how we can use it, not only in the classroom, but also to improve our own teaching.
That's true. That's happening in journalism too, they're starting to use basically fact-checking programs. When a reporter finishes a story, a fact-checker program will go through and say, traditionally in these types of stories, you've included this source or you've included this information. Did you mean to include it in this story too? And it's not writing the story, it's telling the reporter, did you remember this? Did you left this out? And that can be really helpful. And it's sort of like that type of assessment. For people who don't know a great deal about how this all works, let's run through what you just explained. A student is in a modern American history class, and they look up what is the cause of World War I, which no one on earth could probably explain in less than 1,000 words. They ask ChatGPT, what was the cause of World War I? What happens immediately when they hit return?
It is tokenizing your question.
So it's going through and separating it into sub-elements is what you're saying, right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Depending on the model, there might be some sort of pre-processing where it's, dropping certain words from your query that don't give it any informational value.
Like these and ands, maybe?
Yeah, these and ands, that sort of thing. And it's then feeding it into the model, and it's then making a prediction, right? And so really, it's a predictive system that based on this data And it's also helpful to think of it all as data, right? That it's all in a way just data. And so it's in a way just kind of ones and zeros, and it's saying, okay, for this set of ones and zeros, I'm now going to predict by feeding it through this very, very complex model. ChatGPT has like 96 different layers of neural networks that it's feeding it through. That idea of dimensions, that it's calculating math in like 1,000 dimensions, all in the amount of time that it then takes to feed you back a response. Most likely it's all, by the time you see it kind of typing out the response, that's all timing, that's all performance. It's not actually typing, it's not actually like generating as you watch it, like it already has it. And then it's giving it back to you.
So the hallucination happens when the prediction fails, right? So it's guessing what the next logical word or idea is. The hallucination happens when it fails, because then it gets off track, right? And it starts to, now its entire predictive model's off, and it starts hallucinating because it's made an error, and it just keeps compounding on the error because it's never going to work back on track, I don't think, right? Once it's off, it doesn't know how to get back on again. Is that an accurate representation of what's happening when it fails, when it hallucinates?
It doesn't know anything. It's not able to check its own work. And so, it's generating a textual response to an input. And it has no understanding of what reality is or what a lie is. And so, and ultimately there's no way for it to check itself. And that's also why there's a lot of human intervention in training these models. It is to, because it doesn't know it, and the human has to say, this one's better. And then eventually, it's just iterative, both in terms of how many times you have humans sort of create input, and then how many, once you get into the models, the models themselves, like, do parallel mathematical operations where it's checking its own efficiency and trying to, because hallucination is just a part of like the standard deviation or the outliers, right? That kind of come out.
It's likely it's saying I'm 99 or 95% sure I'm right, and every once in a while that means it's wrong. Either that or the training data is wrong. Wrapping this up, what would you say to an instructor who is really hesitant to use AI? What should their first move be? They want to try it, but they're hesitant.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would say that if a teacher ultimately decides like they don't want to use AI in their class, that's perfectly fine, right? Like that's a choice that people make. And also depending on the class, like there may not be a good use case or a reason to use AI. So, but a teacher who like wants to use AI but isn't sure about it, the advice I would give them is to think very hard about what they're trying to do pedagogically, right? Like what is the problem you're trying to solve? What are you trying to teach the students at this moment? And so I think by thinking through that question, instructor could come to a better understanding or a better idea of how they might want to implement AI. Because if the point is just to implement it, then that's going to be very kind of anxiety producing for a lot of instructors that, well, I've been told that I need to incorporate AI in this class, but what does that mean? Thinking about like, what do I want to teach the students, and at what point do I bring in generative AI? I think brainstorming is one of the places that is very, to me, ethically clear, right? Like should be able to use an AI to brainstorm just the same way that you use Google or the internet to kind of ask it questions and it gives you back information. I don't think that yet is intruding on the writing. The other thing, and I think we talked a little bit about this before, is just the thinking about how your assignments are created and how your teaching philosophy and how you implement it, how that works, and how you can design your assignments that in a way that aren't hackable by ChatGPT. I would say like if you're hesitant about it, first of all, like learn more about it, think through why you're using it, think through where and for what reason, you're going to use it. And then ultimately, just try it, I guess. And to try it in a low stakes way, even if it's just to show the students why it's not reliable. Because I think having that conversation is so important. And so that's the other thing I would say, even to the instructor who doesn't want anything to do with it, is that we still need to make it clear to the students sort of what our policies are in that class, right? And so that's some of the efforts that are going on campus is to try to teach our teachers, right? So that's the other thing I would say is learn more about this. Not only use it on your own, not only try it out in class in kind of low stakes ways, but come to the Teaching for Learning Center and attend some of the workshops that are going on there, because we're trying to teach the teachers how to teach with AI and how to reduce that kind of anxiety and that kind of hesitancy. But also, to remind instructors that it's sometimes you probably want to be hesitant because you don't want to just give it free rein. You want it to be transparent. You want it to be helpful. And you're not just letting the students kind of get a free ride, I guess. Hopefully you can design your assignments in a way that they're learning more than they would have without using the AI.
I think you've given us all a lot to think about. It's a lot there's a very thought-provoking episode. So thank you so much, Kevin, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Jared. It's been great being here, and always love to talk about AI, so it's a pleasure.